Yes, sir. All righty. So we've just went live. I need to share all over the face space. Let me see. Oh, yep. Mr. Mickey will do the. Oh, you're sharing everything from you or to YouTube. All right, cool. Then I don't have to play with it at all today. That is awesome. Um, let's go ahead and let a few people come in. But while we're waiting for them to start tuning in, um, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and your background, sir?
Sure. Not that that's going to be the most interesting part of your podcast, that's for sure. But I appreciate the opportunity to be with you 100%. Thanks for reaching out and thanks for doing this. And as we just discussed, thanks for including not only libertarians but the lesser important Republicans and Democrats. Look, I grew up as an economist. I worked in the banking industry as a commercial finance officer for a couple of banks when I got out of business school soon after getting out of undergraduate engineering school. I went to Washington, D.C., ostensibly to make the world a better place, right?
We
That's
all
what it's all about, is going to the seat of power and making government work more efficiently, and then everyone's going to get rich, and we're going to live peacefully, and beer is going to taste better. And that didn't exactly work out, but I did have a good experience in graduate school. I was very lucky. I went to a very pro-market program at the George Washington University, and I had good experiences thereafter. I went to work for a couple of federal agencies, international agencies. I worked for the White House for a couple of years. I went to work in the financial services industry again. This time as an advocate, a professional advocate for free markets and lowering regulation and making the system work better.
yeah.
I was an entrepreneur after that. A buddy of mine and I started our own business. We were in the business of educating bankers and putting on events and educational opportunities. We did that for quite a few years. I taught economics at a couple of universities in Florida, as well as working my way through school at GW. And after that, I went to the police academy in my second career. I worked as a police officer for 11 and a half years from age 49 to 60 until about a year and a half ago. It was something that I'd always wanted to do, and I just put it off and put it off and put it off. And finally, you kind of figure out at the age of 49 that you better not put it off too much longer, because it doesn't get easier. It gets more difficult for a variety of reasons. And had a really terrific experience. Not exactly the experience I had anticipated, of course, in every way. I suppose you could say that about any job, but
Yeah.
certainly when you change fields, you learn a lot about an industry that you maybe you thought you knew something about, but it opens your eyes to any number of angles that you didn't have before. And I ran for Congress as a libertarian. About a year and a half ago, when I launched the campaign, I was still working as a police officer, and ran in Florida's District 20, a very blue district. Then relocated from Florida after 20 years down there to Virginia. My wife and I live in eastern nowhere, Virginia, in the upper right-hand corner, and what we call the Northern Neck, about 2.25 hours east and south of Washington, D.C.
Man, you really missed a chance to going to the libertarian almost paradise of New Hampshire.
Yeah, well, I've missed that so
Eyeballing that.
far. New Hampshire does have a tremendous amount to speak for itself, not the least of which is the Free State Project, of course, and a
Yes.
lot of terrific people up there, and increasingly so. They have waves of success. I keep waiting for it to, hit an inflection point one way or another.
Mhm.
Uh, some of us are skeptical from time to time, but they keep plugging along. And at this point, I think the rational reaction to the movement is one of optimism. Those people are getting the message out and recruiting more and more people every day. So I think it's very exciting.
Uh, I think one of the things that really drives me nuts is we're kind of shoehorned into either being Republican or Democrat these days, whether it comes from your media, your friends,
Right.
family. whatever.
Right. Right.
And most people, they honestly feel like a person without a party, a person without a home. And
Most people, you mean?
yeah, most
Yeah.
folks,
Yeah.
period to the story. And what I like to tell people is there are third parties that are actually a home for us. I'm very politically, at least fiscally conservative. I want to spend less and do more with it.
That's right.
And at the same time, I
It used
want,
to be that the Republican Party did too.
yep. And then
But
there
that was
was
a
that.
long, long, long time ago.
I mean, I think the last Republican that actually tried to do anything with less government would be Reagan. Um, and then,
Well, at the very least, he said so.
uh,
He didn't back that up in terms of
uh,
defense spending, but
yeah,
in other ways, he at least said so.
I mean, and then the Patriot Act hit, which restricts everything, gives government so much more influence on every sector of life.
And insight and capabilities,
Yep. And then
both in
earlier this
terms of violating your privacy and in terms of prosecuting individuals.
they don't even have to prosecute. They can just pick you up now.
Yep.
But and then this year, the Restrict Act was introduced into Congress, and I don't know if it's passed yet, but that would
No, but
make it,
it's a second wave of mischief, isn't it? It's a
yeah,
high tech version.
it's some people are calling it Patriot Act 2.0. I'm calling it Patriot Act squared. I mean, just take a look at it. You can't even have a VPN to protect your own privacy anymore.
Right.
That comes with a 20-year jail sentence.
Right.
It,
We can't have it.
that,
We absolutely can't have it. And the jails would be quite full because, of course, it creates an incentive to get a VPN. It
mhm,
creates a black market. And as we know, as economists, whatever affiliation you might have politically, any economist will tell you the black markets are very, very dangerous. As libertarians, we recognize that, especially at the border in the form of human trafficking through the immigration process.
and
But the
detailing,
war on drugs is the big example, right?
yes, sir.
Just inhumanely dangerous. And creating a black market in terms of technology is another step just absolutely fraught with danger. If there's any silver lining there at all, and I don't think that there is much,
Must
because the
be the
power of the
smartest
federal
one
government
of all time.
to back it up is enormous. If there is any silver lining there, it is that it is such an aggressive policy that there really would be a giant backlash.
Yeah,
Uh, you know, we we had a society that was quite fearful when the Patriot Act was enacted, and our society is not nearly that fearful now. The other thing I think that's different is that we live in a society which has been opening its eyes a little bit more over the past 20 years, and realizes that the government does not typically act in your best interest. We have a government that acts in the interest of the politicians that run it, in the interest of itself, in terms of gaining increasing amounts of power and expanding both its scale and scope. I think more and more people are recognizing that.
yeah. Something my dad used to say is government's only job is to make sure it has a job.
Well, that's its primary goal, right? That
Mhm.
is its primary objective. If you were to look at the Republican Party and the Democratic Party today, each one creates a giant opportunity for the Libertarian Party, in the sense that each one has crappy leadership. But beyond the crappy leader, and I don't mean that to sound personal. I just mean objectively,
Object.
Democrats are not happy with the president, and Republicans are not happy with the individuals that are leading their polling at the moment either, in terms of the race for the White House.
Yes, sir.
But aside from the leadership problems, I believe that any number of Republicans are frustrated with their party, and Democrats as well, regarding their party, because each party has left their policy agenda behind by decades.
Yes. I'm
So if you're a fiscally conservative Republican, you can't possibly be happy with your party. And if you're an anti-war Democrat, you can't possibly be happy with your party.
I mean, even just this past year, since the invasion of Ukraine, um, You've seen a lot of war hawks pop up saying that we have to go defend Ukraine, we have to go defend
On
Eastern
both sides of the aisle.
sides of the aisle. Um,
Yeah,
at first, you saw a lot of Republicans doing the nope, nope, not our problem, backing away,
right,
and a lot of
right.
Democrats doing the war hawk. So it's like the parties can't even decide what their actual platform is. It's almost seeing what the other does so they can react opposite.
Well, that's exactly right. Each one has their primary objective to keep the other side out of power.
Yeah.
And this is where authoritarianism comes from in a democracy. You know, we used to say that authoritarian regimes could not rise in a country as adherent to the Constitution of the United States. And now we see that that's just simply not true. We used to go, when I was a young man, we used to go so far as to make fun of other countries
Mhm.
where you saw authoritarianism growing out of democracy. And the way that it works is some politician convinces you that what you have to fear is that other idiot coming to power,
Yep.
as opposed to the loss of your civil liberties or the loss of the functionality of your constitution. And so if you give me more power, I can help that other fool from coming to power. I can protect you, and that's what you need to be fearful of, is my inability to protect you. This is where authoritarianism comes from.
Uh, yeah. I mean, it is always a boogeyman behind the corner or under your bed to get you, and you must give me power. You must relinquish some of your freedoms, give me power so I can protect you.
That's exactly right, and it's fostered on both sides of the aisle now, because each one is able to point at the other and say, "Look at what you should be fearing." And of
Mhm.
course, we can all argue about all of the different reasons for that, not the least of which is the rise of the all powerful federal government itself. But you also have to recognize that a piece of this problem is that Americans no longer get their news from a common source. It is more like the 19th century, where everyone got their news from a partisan newspaper, but now everything is nationalized. So everyone has their favorite fill in the blank social media or podcast or
Yep.
favorite networks or favorite TV shows.
And most people don't even realize it.
Yeah. And well, that's exactly right. And so what they see is a different narrative, a different storyline, all too often a different fact base, either because people are literally lying to you, or at the very least, not telling you about things that you would learn about on the other stations, right?
Mhm.
So you have this weird situation where people, well meaning people, quite literally cannot understand why people disagree with them, literally cannot understand cannot communicate with people who have different political philosophies than they do, because they are living in a different narrative. They are perceiving the world fundamentally differently, and that's where not only antagonism comes from, but that's where fear comes from. If you don't understand your fellow Americans, your propensity to fear them is much greater, and that's the fear that our authoritarianistic Republicans and Democrats are foisting upon us.
So let's get into some questions here. I think I'm actually going to start with COVID this time, and I know YouTube just slapped a huge red flag on here. That's fine. Uh, I'm I'm not a big fan of trying to dodge minefields.
Well, it's difficult, even if you are disposed to do so. It's not easy,
Yeah.
because the electronic surveillance techniques so often it misinterpret what you say.
Yep. So it's recently come out that COVID is not nearly as dangerous as we initially thought it was. We, the American people, were working off of the information we had and we were given.
That's right.
And so many of us, while we didn't like lockdowns, I actually did not actively participate in one at all.
Right.
Um, the the lockdowns themselves really crippled American business nationwide, especially small businesses, mom and pop shop.
Horrific.
It
Horrific. The
mauled.
damage of the lockdowns themselves rivaled the damage of the virus in terms of scale.
Yes, and there was that monster that we were talking about, that thing to fear.
That's
Give
right.
up some of your liberties, give up your liberty to leave your home. According to the emergency measures here in Michigan, I was not allowed to walk across the street to go see my mother and father-in-law.
Yeah.
I obviously did, but,
I won't tell.
right, that's where it came out. That's where it hit, and, I was wondering because the new, bill that just got hit in today, or not today, but earlier this week, is to reclaim much of the unspent COVID funds, ARPA,
Yep.
namely, from cities that have not quite yet spent them.
Right.
Number 1, do you agree with that sort of plan?
Yeah.
Because we did dig ourselves into a hole, and now we have less money circulating around our own country, but we also printed up I think it is a third of all US money that has ever been printed in that
Yeah.
space of time.
It's on that order of magnitude. It's actually about a third domestically speaking. If you take into consideration the monetary base, it's outside the United States. It's not quite so bad. But to your point, um, it's a heartbreaker. And of course, one of the problems with bad public policy is sunsetting it. You, we have a problem to unpack everything you said there because it's a
Yep.
load. Yeah, obviously we want to put restrictions on that spending and we want to pull it back when it's not spent, and we need to stop wasting money. I don't think there's a whole lot of counter argument to that, right?
Yeah.
However, uh, one of the problems is that we have sort of a sense of fairness across cities. You know, those that didn't rush to waste the money are going to feel a little bit screwed because they're more prudent, right?
Yeah, that's
That's
actually what's happening here.
yeah,
We had 2 council members today here in Flint, uh, sound the alarm for this because many people didn't know.
yep,
And now there's a rush to try to spend these funds so they do not go back
bingo,
to the federal government.
bingo,
And they're looking I have to commend them here. They're looking at making sure that majority of these funds get to the citizens' hands themselves, not as a direct payout or cash payout, but, say your roof is wrecked. That happens a lot here. We see people with blue tarps over their roofs or holes in their
yeah,
roof, and they
yeah,
wanna make sure that gets replaced, increase the
right,
quality of life.
right,
Whereas I can see other cities just looking at small projects. Oh, let's spend 200,000, pay a random contractor, even overpay him so we don't have to send this back to go
right.
pay or paint all the fire hydrants.
Right. And of course, the most efficient way to handle this, but my understanding of the block grant uh, system that is in place for these particular funds won't allow it. But the most efficient way to handle this is just to stop taxing people as a method of distributing those effectively distributing those funds. Is just to pause or to reduce the effective tax rate for some period of time. The other problem you have is not just a sense of unfairness across communities, but you were putting your finger on it, and an aspect of it is sort of an unfairness or an inefficiency across time, not just across communities, in the sense that you're creating an incentive to rush, which is never efficient, because it is not true that the communities with the biggest problems are the ones that spend it the fastest. They're just, better at bureaucracy because they understand it might get cut off at any minute.
Yeah, they are the end state. So while there might
Yeah,
be a time limit put in place from the beginning, as things trickle down and move through, go through the bureaucratic nightmare that is our governmental system,
right.
by the time it gets to the end point to where it's supposed to be done something with or
It
used,
takes a long time.
and then they're sitting there last minute. That's something I learned
Yeah.
very quickly in the
No,
army.
this is a huge problem. And as we always say in public policy, it's the change that hurts.
Yeah.
And the history of your part of Michigan is one of the primary examples of bad policy changing and ruining a whole portion of the country, but certainly the Detroit metropolitan area. When you protect an automotive industry for decades against international competition, and you develop an industry that large, arguably, depending on how you define it, but the largest industry in the world.
Yeah, it was the Hobbesian Leviathan.
Yeah, there were places in Detroit that were some of the most wealthy communities in the world.
Hmm.
You look at the Bloomfield Hills of the world, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
So
where,
line workers with the UAW,
yeah,
just entry level workers that have been there forever because unions, you're stuck in your position until someone dies or retires.
right.
Um,
The
but certain,
political power of those unions was tremendous.
yes, it was. You could not be elected to any position in any of these automotive cities without the backing of the UAW or
Well,
any.
that's absolutely true. What a lot of people don't realize, it was difficult to run against the unions to win the Democratic primary for president of the United States.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's how powerful they were.
But
So, yeah, there was a lot of protectionism, and then when that goes away, or when the competitors are able to overcome it, all of a sudden, the industry shrinks very, very rapidly. It's not a smooth transition, and as a consequence, you saw the enormous shrinkage, the exodus, and the shrinkage of the city of Detroit and surrounding environment.
yep, and then
Just going through a hell of a time in the 80s and 90s, of course.
the desiccation of neighborhoods where at one point you would see very vibrant, very, you know, if not wealthy, at least stable economic neighborhoods that could
That's
even
right.
sustain, that are now crumbling buildings, if not just piles of bricks.
Quite literally crumbling, and in some cases bulldozed. It looks more like Havana than it does Miami, right?
Yeah, I
So,
joke
in
often.
that sense, it is the change in public policy that kills you, and politicians being unable to stop dabbling, unable to resist change. It means that you have to stand against bad public policy at the outset. And a lot of people don't realize how dangerous protectionism is in the long run.
Yeah.
If your favorite industry, it feels good for the present hour, even though the rest of America is paying for it and then some. But maybe you don't care about them, so you build up your community around these protected industries, and the people that pay the price are uh, people who haven't yet even moved into the community, or your children, and that's just something that's very all too easy to disregard.
So libertarians and anarcho-capitalists. I know most people don't know what they are. Many that do not like them, um, just because they are anarchist, though with a set of principles to them. Uh, but they tend to overlap a lot in terms of ideology. And one thing
Sure.
that I see both talk about is the abolition of the IRS.
Yep.
And if
which
you want to become
which
president,
is it's not a simplistic issue, but it is a good idea in the long run. The relationship between us as individuals and the federal government in terms of taxation, I think, is really, really inappropriate. It's inappropriate in a
for
couple of
18,
senses. One is that we give far too much money to the government, which is too big, too powerful, too broad in scope, too deep in scale. For all these reasons, we were arguably better off before the federal government had the constitutional authority to go after the incomes of individual Americans. So, in that sense, I view it as inappropriate. But the other reason I feel that it's inappropriate is that the government, I don't know if you've ever been audited as I have, it's a very unpleasant experience, as you might imagine. The,
yeah, my
you're,
dad had to go through that.
Yeah,
Um,
you are guilty until proven innocent. They have their own courts. It's not like a normal criminal court, criminal trial situation. The relative imbalance of power is almost laughable. As an individual, you standing against the federal government of the United States, it is not a relationship that makes much sense. There are any number of attorneys that would recommend that you just pay and make the thing go away, even if you're right? And they're wrong. This happens all the time. And I think that speaks to the fact, in for both reasons, the fact that we give them too much money and the fact that we have no ability to stand up against them. For both reasons, I think it makes much more sense to require the federal government to go to individual states to raise money, so that if you can convince the state houses to fork over the cash, then knock yourself out.
Yeah.
But in states are going to be in a much stronger position to stand up against the federal government than we are as individuals. That's not a silver bullet. There is still enormous leverage the federal government has over a state, but it's a much more appropriate relationship than the federal government going directly after individuals, which is fundamentally unconstitutional, which of course is why there was required a constitutional amendment to allow the IRS to be created and go after individuals. It's just, inappropriate.
Yep. When the IRS, well, not the IRS itself, but when the first national income tax was proposed, it was just after the Civil War, and it was to recoup the cost of the war. It was so unpopular that they sunset it nearly immediately.
Yeah.
And then it was brought right back, I want to say in the 1920s,
Yeah.
which did not help the Great Depression at all, because now people had so many people or so many entities and polities asking for, well, not asking, demanding money almost by gunpoint.
That's right. Well, eventually at gunpoint, certainly. The first letter doesn't have a gun attached to it, but eventually it's at gunpoint.
And now we've gone so far as to hire 86,500-ish IRS agents and
more, 86,000 extra.
Extra, yes. And a portion of those, a decent portion, is actually armed.
Yes, which is a bad look for an accountant.
It it would scare me if I were someone's tax accountant, knowing that, one, I hold this person's entire life in my hands, and if I have one wrong pen stroke, I'm having IRS agents knock on both of our doors, ask to see all the records. And that's the same way they put Capone away. They didn't put him away for murder,
Of
racketeering,
course it
or
is.
moving
Of
any
course it
alcohol
is.
during Prohibition. It was tax evasion.
And this is why they think it's such a good idea, right?
And
That's their argument.
and
That,
to you and I,
this is how we put Capone away. We need this kind of leverage because a lot of you fools out there aren't paying your taxes and you're criminal by nature. And so you're probably committing other crimes. And we need this as leverage to go after you.
and you and I are sitting here because with that sort of leverage over us, who in their life can say that they filled out every 1040 EZ tax form from the time they were 18 to the time that they no longer qualified for a 1040 EZ? Say they got married, had a child, had,
All kinds of reasons.
Yeah, and filled out the simplest form they have with no errors.
Oh,
And
it rarely happens. I used to have a whole collection of nasty letters from the IRS telling me I had done something wrong, and either enclosed was a check or a bill, right?
Yep.
And at some point you kind of feel like, why am I even bothering? Why don't you people just tell me how much I owe and send me a bill at the end of the year?
That's the scary part. So
Yeah, they already have the information.
they already know exactly how much you owe or how much they owe you based on
Right.
overpayments and your dependents.
Right.
The lobby for these tax companies blocked the IRS and the federal government from making a bill that would just do that, streamline the entire process.
Right.
The entire industry, as you said, was protected.
Yep.
And when
It's terrible.
like that, it causes problems for everyone. You,
No,
me,
it's absolutely horrible. And I appreciate wanting to see it go, right?
Mhm.
Because I'm afraid that what would happen is that, notwithstanding the fact that I do wish that I wasn't in the paperwork business on behalf of the IRS, what I do fear would happen is they would send you a bill at the end of the year. You would fork over whatever money that they said, and then they would give you some sort of a statement that you couldn't possibly understand, and you would just accept it.
We
And
could argue
that's the direction we're moving in now because the tax code is so complex.
not just complex, it is massive. So it is split among 2 volumes. Each one, or both of them combined, is 2,652 pages.
Yeah,
Kinda
I've only made it through 1814. So
Yeah,
I got another 800 pages to go.
I mean,
That must be where my tax breaks are because I haven't run into those yet. They must be at the back.
you and I are both sitting there. I mean, I got I would say lucky, but most people kind of frown at it when I say I got lucky. I'm a disabled vet. I'm 90% disabled. That is enough to cover my livelihood and everything that, my essentials, my bills and everything. And that is a decent tax write-off for my wife who still works.
Sure, I appreciate that. You are not lucky. By the way, thank you for your service. It is a piece of patriotism that I think that we appreciate not nearly as much as we should. No, you're not lucky. You are lucky that the crappy, overbearing government at least doesn't have the guts to weasel out from the contract that they made with you all those years ago. So in that sense, you're lucky that it isn't worse.
Yeah, that is about the point, and,
Yeah,
it does count as a decent tax write-off for my wife. She just counts me as a dependent. Okay,
right.
that's fine. But on the flip side of that, not very many other people have that sort of deal, even people who are just on regular Social Security disability income.
That's right.
Don't have taxes, and then they have to fight that system, which is far more monotonous and far more, uh, monolithic. It
Yeah,
is huge and a maze. It is a labyrinth, and
yeah.
they still have to fight through that, pay taxes on it, and then try to receive the small stipend from their Social Security, which is just about already tapped and gone.
Oh yeah. No, the way that the tax system is set up these days is horrific, not to mention the tax rates themselves, the amount of money that the government takes. And of course, there's another element to the IRS debate and issue that we haven't touched on yet, and that is a problem, I believe, with many, well, all government institutions, but it's a big problem with the IRS, and that's the extent to which it is occasionally politicized for very focused reasons. And, we all want to not believe it's true, right? We go through these episodes where something happens. We live in denial. We put the pillow back over our head and pretend like it's not happening. Surely the people who are accusing the IRS of this, they are conspiracy theorists of the highest order. They don't know what they're talking about. And we will eventually learn that it didn't happen. And then a period of time goes by and you find out that it did happen. It probably didn't happen exactly the way it was leaked in the beginning, but it actually did happen. We've gone through, 3 or 4 cycles just in the last generation of these things happening.
It's
And it
terrifying.
undermines everybody's confidence in the system. Not only is it horrific for the targeted parties, but it means no one else should be trusting them.
Mhm. Because you don't know if you're gonna end up on the wrong side of the people in power, and they use this what used to be a tool to help the country keep and run itself that has been
Right.
bastardized, now weaponized against you.
It is a political organization. It is, of course, by its nature, because it has political appointees at the top. And even to the extent to which it's run by civil servants, which it is largely, as a former federal civil servant myself, I can tell you the vast majority of those people have a fairly monolithic political view of the world. They are all almost definitionally statists, right?
Yep.
Most people go to work for the federal government, don't do so to hold it back, as some of us as young, naive, conservative economists did in the 80s. Most people want to, at the very least, make it better. That's putting a shine on it. But most want to make it stronger, more powerful, more capable to, as they would put it, do good in the world. And
Mhm.
so if you're not that way, if you have a libertarian streak, never mind, heaven help you if you're a registered libertarian. But if you have a libertarian streak, you just wouldn't fit in around here.
No.
And that's a real problem. And again, it speaks to the inappropriate nature of the relationship between the federal government and individuals. We need a state to stand between us, to be able to stand up to the federal government. Again, it's not a silver bullet, but they're in a much better position to do so than we are. And that speaks to the importance of sunsetting other organizations as well. For those of us who are old enough to remember the bad old days of the FBI in the 60s, what we are seeing in terms of the FBI going after the Trump campaign and Donald Trump himself is merely a reminder. It is not a wake-up call. We should have been awake a long time ago. It is not fresh news. It's just the latest episode. And that is a real shame. And there's, I think, one of the ironies of this story is that there's really no deep need for an FBI. The vast majority of what it does, state police agencies could pick up on their own.
Yeah.
The counter espionage stuff could be picked up by the Defense Department and should be. The Defense Department is still less politicized than the FBI. And then all this political crap needs to stop altogether.
Yeah. The United States has 16 intelligence gathering services, including the FBI.
And are you including this podcast? That would make it 17, or it's the 16th?
No. God, there's so many for the internet. I think they all overlap. CIA, NSA, FBI, all the alphabet soup.
Well, they all have an electronic surveillance capability and mandate functionally.
We're only hearing about the FBI. So what are the other 15 doing? That's the scary part to me. And
right, these are agencies that haven't gone after the Trump campaign. But that doesn't mean that everything else they're doing is adherent to the law. And remember, the problem with the FBI is not particular individuals. That is the way it appears to us. But when you go through cycle after cycle after cycle, you have to admit the problem is not the individuals, because individuals come and go. It's structural. It's the nature of the organizations. It's the way it's set up. And it is set up very similarly to other agencies who are in the business of collecting information, most notably the CIA, of course, because it is so political and political by its nature. I think people in the CIA would argue that it should be, because it's political leadership that they need to be able to direct and allocate most appropriately their resources.
One case in point there is Iran-Contra, but the other case in point, I mean, both these are very pointed. How many sovereign governments throughout the world, usually in Southeast Asia or South America or
Latin America,
has the CIA toppled for a political purpose on the world stage, mind you, just of reinforcing the United States position? But sometimes it could be argued that it was for the benefit of one or two people within the United States government than and of themselves. What was it? The invasion of Panama.
Yes.
Just because.
Right. We had to go after Manuel Noriega because he was interrupting the efficiency of our drug war. And the administration thought it could make political hay by looking tough. That was a real unfortunate circumstance. Talk about an admission that you can't close down the border. Talk about an admission that the war on drugs isn't working, right? Yeah. It's really sad. Objectively speaking, however you feel about the ethics of drugs, and you know how I feel about it, so we should talk about that probably in a moment. But however you feel about the ethics of the war on drugs, you have to admit objectively that it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And as a police officer on the road, you figure that out pretty darn quick.
I mean, a large part about drugs is very few substances are actually, quote, outlawed. It is a lack of taxation on it, and you're not allowed to have certain things if there is no tax paid on it in either its production or its sale.
Right.
So, saying that, things like heroin, cocaine, used to be marijuana. It still is in several states. This state is not one of them.
Right.
They are less illegal by being banned and more illegal by the lack of tax on them. They're proscribed rather than prescribed.
That's right.
And a lot of people will generally just look at, oh my God, that is cocaine. That is illegal to have. No, it's illegal to have without having paid my taxes on it, but they won't give it a tax code.
That's
That,
exactly right. They just don't have an interest in working with you yet. When they figure out how to extract enough money from it, maybe we'll have a chance.
well, I mean,
Look,
there's more.
the war on drugs doesn't work.
No.
And even if it did, the government doesn't have the moral authority to impose it. And the real problem, of course, is the black market that it creates. That's why there are so many, dozens of thousands annually, deaths due to fentanyl. It's not per se because of fentanyl as a drug. It is because fentanyl is a powerful drug, and because there is so much fraud and mismanagement, lack of disclosure, because it is a black market and not one that works efficiently with competitiveness and trusted providers. For all of these reasons, it's an exceedingly dangerous market. And that is what contributes to the enormous number of deaths that we have.
As any economist will tell you, where there is a demand, there will always be a supply.
That's exactly right. It just changes the price. And when the price becomes high enough, not only will you bring people in to service the market, but people will fight for it. And this is why we see such exceedingly high murder rates in urban areas that have been inundated by the drug trade. And it's no coincidence that the drug trade is in these areas where bad public policy at a community level is at its worst, where you see bad schools, bad zoning, bad housing policy. The war on drugs takes hold. And a lot of people who don't understand how these things work sort of believe that all those other public policy problems are exacerbated by the war on drugs, and it actually works the other way around.
Yeah.
The war on drugs takes hold. The oppressive criminal justice system we have is at its most dangerous, at its most oppressive, does its most to undermine communities and families and individuals in those areas where you have other bad public policy, most importantly schools, but also bad housing policies. And
then
this is the combination that leads to a persistence of intergenerational poverty that not only that you do not see in other countries, but that would not be predicted by free markets. They are intergenerational poverty is a function of bad public policy.
Yep. And then those policy makers like to blame the issues on the area on the people of the area rather than the bad policy, because to them there is no such thing as a bad policy as long as either I did it or someone I know did it and it was their brainchild. So
That is
oftentimes, like
exactly right.
North Side Flint here, it is run down, beat down, crime is rampant, and it is the public policy that has driven it to this point. And people
Right.
always like to point at North Side of Flint and say, don't go there. Those people are dangerous. When I was running for state rep here, I got told often, don't go up there without someone else with you or unless you're armed. And
Yeah,
I'm
right.
going, look, there might be problems there, but I'm not going to be afraid of a place I live, for one.
Right.
And for two, I'm not going to feel that these people are a danger to me. It's the people that made this situation for them that are the danger.
Well, that's exactly right, because they're poised to do it to other communities too, because they haven't learned their lessons.
No. You hear it all the time. That wasn't real X, or that policy was, it would have worked had they done it this way, and they try again and again.
And it never works.
Never does. It
never works.
An insanity.
No, it's really horrible. One of the things that is most frustrating to economists, of course, is that socialists, if I can use that term broadly and
I
a
mean, I
little bit
already
loosely.
crossed the COVID line, so I'm pretty sure we can go into the socialist line now.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe and we can double back to COVID if you want to, because I
No,
don't know if we
no,
beat that horse
we
completely.
went through that one, but,
But
you already said that word,
and
so
let me use a broader term, if I can just say, sort of statists
mhm,
or folks on the left side of the aisle. It's this sort of common knowledge theme, things that are taken for granted that programs work. And the irony, I think, is that it's actually the opposite that is true. But we live in a public policy environment that is absolutely in denial. We live in a public policy environment that is driven by people's desires to do good for others and to appear as politicians, to appear as doing good for others, and wanting to appear that way, and playing on the natural desires of all Americans. All Americans want others to have better lives, right?
yeah,
And there's a natural inclination to do something, and politicians play on that and foster this environment of absolute denial by failing to recognize that these programs, just objectively speaking, just don't work.
you are
The
absolutely correct.
programs that we have in the United States that are the worst for us are those that are most dominated, most controlled by the government. The most glaring primary example, of course, is public schools, public education, where
Mhm.
everyone's frustrated with it.
I get
Our
so
public
tired of hearing politicians or school teachers or talking heads on the news coming up with the phrase, "There is no such thing as other people's kids."
Oh my lord, I almost could not believe the president said that.
I
When
I
I
broke
when,
a coffee cup when I first heard it. Coffee cups die in my house very often, but when I first heard that, "What on earth?" And I slammed my cup down
when
to
I read that, I honestly thought that someone had taken it out of context, right? That
mhm,
he couldn't possibly mean that, particularly after having gone through such public discussions on this when Hillary Clinton, was making her "it takes a village" case.
yep,
So, surely he is, functioning with sufficient memory not to say something that dumb. But indeed, I watched the video, and that was no mistake.
no, sir,
He really believes that it is up to teachers to raise your children. I
yep,
don't think there's any recognition that teachers are hired hands and need to live in a competitive environment where they're more easily fired.
mhm,
Same thing with police officers. I'm not trying to throw a stone that I don't recognize needs to be thrown at the industry that I was in most recently as well, because it does. But this idea of empowering teachers to the point where they feel entitled in their opinions and give pushback to parents who want to be the ones to determine what books, for example, their kids should be exposed to, I think is really repugnant. We can all argue about which books kids ought to be exposed to. And I'm okay with everyone disagreeing about it. I might disagree with the Republicans, and you and I might even disagree.
yeah,
But
as
it
long
is the parents that
as it
need
comes from
to
alcohol.
exert influence over their local school boards and their individual schools. And when school boards act like it's not parents' business, or parents aren't sophisticated enough to make these decisions, holy hell, where did you get where what side of the bed did you wake up on that you think you just walked out of a Holiday Inn Express? You're not that smart.
A teacher in Arizona said, "For me to be in this field, I have to have a master's degree. To be honest, most of your parents aren't that smart. Most of them do not have master's degrees. So who are you really gonna listen to? Who's more qualified, me or your parents?" And I have to
I can't even I can't
spend
even
8
talk
hours
about
a
it.
day at most if you're, elementary with these children. If you're middle school through high school, maybe an hour or 2 per subject, and then they move on to somewhere else.
That's right.
Whereas I spend the rest of the day with my children. It is my job to give my morals and my beliefs and my knowledge outside of the, bare minimum basics that public education is supposed to give you to my child, and they're trying to override that as well when they can't even teach my kids how to read or write or even proper math. Our test scores have been falling across the country at a very alarming rate. Here in Flint, we have 10% literacy rate and 10% math proficiency rate.
Yeah.
So if you can't teach my kids how to read and how to do simple arithmetic, what makes you think that you're even close to qualified to teaching my kids about how they should react in society?
No, it's absolutely repugnant. And to your point, it's not even objectively true that they're more educated. One of the worst, most tickling and ironic cases, of course, is Fairfax, Virginia, which is one of the most educated counties in the world. You know, it's not even true that the average teacher is much more educated than the average parent, much less qualified to dish on ethical matters, or should be allowed to choose what books are put in front of children. The whole idea, the whole basic fundamental idea that schools should be dishing out ethics at all, I think is subject to tremendous scrutiny. And if you include ethics to be don't punch the kid in the face who's sitting next to you, okay,
Yeah,
I'll give you that.
that's
But
state.
anything more subtle and sophisticated than that, I'm going to have to ask you to back off and send a letter home in the backpack before I let you have an unsupervised discussion with my kid.
I mean,
It's a very weird supposition, I think, that teachers have to themselves that they didn't used to have.
so here in Flint, we do have teachers that are just trying to do the job in and of itself. We don't have that societal issue, thankfully.
And there are many like that across the nation.
However, across the nation, we also have the ones popping up that believe that they know better how to societally integrate your child than you do.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and I think in a lot of ways that kind of violates my freedoms and rights as a parent, obviously, but
Of
also
course
a
it
lot of
does.
our
Of
freedoms
course it does.
in religion, because a lot of things they're trying to teach definitely go against the Muslim faith, definitely go against evangelical Christian faiths. You know,
Absolutely it does.
the Abrahamic faiths as a whole are completely ignored and violated by some of these teachings.
And undermined.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's no question about it. Having been raised by a Lutheran and a Calvinist, I can tell you that there, you don't want to know how my family feels about these issues, right?
right.
This is all of this means not only doing a better job of negotiating hard against the unions, but it
Mhm.
also speaks to our desperate need for school choice, of course. And I
Mhm.
think one of the other ironies is that teachers do not realize that school choice for kids will eventually, in the long run, also mean school choice for teachers, that teachers will make more money in the long run. The
Yeah, it
reason that,
opens up a competitive market, supply and demand.
of
You are
course it does.
they
Of
are
course it
schools are
does.
demanding the supply of these teachers' knowledge and
Yeah,
faith and goodwill, and in return, they're willing to shell out higher amounts of money. And if a school is not paying a teacher enough, they can just walk away and go to another school that pays higher
that's
instead
right.
of having a blanket salary across the board. Now you're just kind of stuck.
And the unions undermine all of that by precluding teachers from being evaluated based on performance, and particularly precluding them from being compensated based on performance. Same thing with police officers, by the way. So unions really stand in the way of teachers making more money, both politically in terms of thwarting school choice, but also in terms of thwarting the ability to evaluate them and pay them on a differential basis. The reason teachers make so little money at private schools so often, not uniformly, but on the whole, teachers don't do particularly well at the private schools because the private schools are so often competing on price because they don't have the coin, right?
Yep.
They're not getting the $15,000 or whatever it might be per pupil that the public schools are spending, and $15,000, of course, is a lot of money to ask in tuition. So the private schools are always trying to pinch a penny, and so they're reaching out to people who are willing to teach for less money because they believe in the cause, whether it's an evangelical school, a Catholic school, a non-sectarian school, but you're typically looking for people who believe in the cause that the school represents. And that necessarily narrows the base of people that you can attract.
Yeah, and that is a huge thing. One of our longtime viewers here, Miss Melissa, pops up and says, "We need more teachers." Well, if we pull back or negotiate harder with these teachers' unions and make it to where these teachers can be compensated based on their performance, class performance, and you end up with more incentives to actually become a teacher. Because as we look at things
Of
now,
course.
we hear all the teachers' hardships, at least the ones that aren't pushing some of these weird narrative views that I cannot get behind. You always end up with the same tragic story of teachers not getting paid what they are worth for the actual job that they do, which is necessary.
Of course, and there is no higher calling than being a teacher. I truly believe that, but the whole system is undermined because we don't pay them what they would get in a competitive market. The same thing plays out, of course, for police officers.
Yep.
Imagine alternatively how powerful it would be if the mayor of some town or county, or a county administrator or a city administrator would take out national advertising that says, I'm looking for the best and the brightest, and I'm not really all that concerned about dickering over whether I'm going to pay you 60,000 or 70,000. I'll start you at 90,000. I'm going to work you your way up to 150,000. But
you have to maintain that level of professional.
Here's the deal. I'm going to evaluate you on your performance. I'm going to be involved in your training. I'm going to be involved in what it means to perform at a very high level in your institution, whether you're a teacher or a police officer. And here's the bite. If I come to work in a bad mood one day, I have the right to fire you. This is absolutely critical. We want police work and teaching to both be more like other industries, other businesses. We want the good ones to be paid more and the mediocre to be paid less. And we want the bad ones to be fired. And so any way possible to impose market forces, we need to support. We also need more competitiveness among agencies in law enforcement,
Mm-hmm.
where I worked. The city only really had two choices. One was the police department that I worked for, that the city maintained. And as they like to tell us every once in a while, they could fire us all and hire the sheriff's office, and they would come in on a contractual basis. But even so, that's not a tremendous amount of choice, right?
Yeah.
You would like to see a situation in which 3 or 4 organizations, whether those are in the public sector or the private sector, be able to compete on a contractual basis to provide law enforcement services.
Well, Mike, we're coming up on our hour, and I didn't hit up everything that I wanted to.
It's the way it always is, isn't it?
It really is, and we had a lot of great conversations here. And it's nice running into another libertarian. Yes, I am a registered Republican, but libertarian is definitely where my heart goes. It's just no one knows.
I appreciate that. We're going to shake you off of that Republican tree.
I mean,
I think you're going to see a campaign on the other side of the nomination, starting a year from now, that's going to impress you with our professionalism, that's going to impress you with the bold nature, the transformative nature of the public policy platform that we're running on. We're going to completely differentiate ourselves from the Republicans and the Democrats and do so in a way that's going to win a lot of hearts and minds. I think you're going to be proud of us.
I don't doubt that whatsoever. But once public policy here changes to where I don't need 3,000 signatures to run as an independent, I think that's when I can get into it. Because having to campaign before I even campaign is really...
It's a lift. Yeah, I ran for Congress as a libertarian 1.5 years ago. It is absolutely a lift. You do it for the love of the cause, right?
Right. But I just wanted to thank you for coming on. My co-host was sick, so we missed out on half of the view that we typically have when we have someone on. She is amazing. I would like to extend an invitation to have you back during actual primary season when you are standing up and out and aside from your counterparts on the libertarian
Yeah,
stage.
let's do it, 9, 10, 11 months from now, and we'll
Mhm.
have some more different and interesting things to talk about.
I
In
would
the
love.
meantime, I would invite folks to check out our websites or drop me a phone call or an email. Our contact information is on our websites.
Well, the last guy kept putting his or promoting his email and his website out all in all. I will make sure that we go ahead and put yours out there in the interest of fairness. But
Thank
thank
you. I
you so
appreciate
very
that.
much for coming on. It was a pleasure seeing you. It was a pleasure meeting you. Have a great day and have a good campaign, sir.
It was absolutely my pleasure. It's been a joy to be with you. I look forward to being with you again. Thanks a
Thank
lot.